Welcome to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Established in 2016, the Fintech Times is a global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report on the latest and brightest ideas from the fintech world. Follow the conversation using hashtag TFD News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times.
Hi, welcome to the latest episode of the podcast. My name is Mark Walker. I'm the editorial director of the Fintech Times, and I'd like to welcome my guest to the studio.
Hi there. I'm Philip Rathle, CTO at Neo4j. Neo4j is a company that's been around for over a decade, building technology that's used by most banks in the world, quite a few fintech companies, and lots of startups. And we'll get into why, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you very much for joining us here today.
It's a pleasure.
I guess maybe, as you sort of said, a little bit of the background. Obviously, you've been around for quite a long time. Where did you start? How did you start sort of going as a company? Give us a brief background.
Really, the key realization that drove the formation of the company and the product was that much of the world shows up as networks. And what we do is we take those networks and we immediately shove them into tables, which actually leaves on the table a lot of analysis that could be done and deeper understanding. For example, payment networks. Well, payment networks are movements of money between people, but there's a lot of financial crime and fraud and opportunity for customer upsell. And if you can understand the dynamics of the system more deeply, then it turns out actually you can do much better at identifying bad behaviors, cutting them short, stopping them before they happen, as well as making recommendations and so on. This is also true of the way data moves inside of an enterprise, understanding and mapping those data movements, which is especially important for AI. Also, there are lots of tree-shaped kind of network structures inside of financial services like asset ownership, where if you're trying to do ultimate beneficial owner, likewise with entity reconciliation, you have lots of different identifiers show up for people or companies that often end up being duplicates. And so how do you tie those together? Well, understanding how those actually connect and fit together can give you the piece of the puzzle you need in order to connect it up. So really it was the realization that in the data world, there was a gap and a massive opportunity to treat networks as networks, or the term we use is graphs, and to generalize these complex structures and actually store them in the way that they show up and give you a data platform, and a language and a set of APIs, and more recently agents and MCP servers and all the rest to be able to up-level nearly every area inside of finance.
Just to jump back a little bit, I was quite intrigued by the terminology of graphs. It's not something I'd come across before.
Yeah.
Is that an industry term, or is it something that you kind of came up with?
It really comes out of graph theory and mathematics, where Leonard Euler in the 1700s, Königsberg Bridge problem, by essentially saying, let's take this real world system and let's simplify it mathematically and treat it as nodes, which are things, and then relationships, which are, or the relationship between two different objects. And so that representation is naturally what any business person will whiteboard. If you ask them to explain their domain, it's like circle, this thing, this person has an account, and this account, has these other people, someone else maybe who's a co-owner who has access to it. I have this, person who has multiple policies for an insurance company that insure these different things. These can all be represented as nodes and relationships. And in finance, you end up with these incredibly complex structures. One example is the Panama Papers. Probably most watchers will be familiar with this Pulitzer Prize winning piece of data journalism that happened in the time frame. And what was interesting in the data was not the data itself. It's that this shell company is owned by this shell company, is owned by someone who shares an address, is owned by another shell company, is owned by someone who's the spouse of someone else. And so the story all was essentially to be had in the connections between the data. And ICIJ used Neo4j to essentially untangle this and reveal the story.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. Okay. So let's fast forward to where we are now. Obviously, we're sitting here within the Middle East. What's your experience here in the region?
This is my first time personally in the region. And what I'm finding is essentially what I expected, but in a very bustling, lots of energy, lots of investment happening. Web Summit's an incredible venue. I've had multiple experiences as a Web Summits in other locations, including Lisbon, where I've given talks. And, just a very high quality venue, audience, and energy in the Middle East. So really excited about it.
And from a business perspective, obviously there's a great opportunity in this region as well, in the Middle East. Where do you see yourselves sort of playing with that? How much are you doing at the moment, and what are you looking to expand on?
Yeah, really part of my reason for coming is to share the fact that many, the top banks in the US, the top banks in Europe, top banks in the UK, a number in Australia are all using this technique and this approach, knowledge graphs, graph database, graph analysis to up-level their businesses. We don't yet have a lot of awareness here. So really it's about first step to share knowledge and what other, and to help bring a new technique and a new product into region.
And I think, I don't know how much research you've done. Obviously, there's a different dynamic within the region to perhaps Europe and the US. Have you seen much of that at the moment, or is this what the reason for coming here is to sort of understand the nuances of the market?
From my perspective, it's a bit more to understand the nuances. We do have some business here. It's a bit more in government than it is in financial services.
Okay. And I guess the idea of sort of the banking sort of ecosystem, if you like, within the Middle East, I've always seen it to be quite traditional still. But obviously, there we are seeing lots and lots more movements of modernization. And I guess you're key to some of those digital transformation journeys, aren't you?
That's right. And AI has really been a massive tailwind for this technology. It turns out that AI agents are better able to engage with data in graph form because it's a more natural representation. And, to get a bit technical, the queries that get generated out of complex human questions, which are rapidly becoming complex questions asked by agents, are much more tersely expressed. Like it takes 5 lines of code instead of hundreds of lines of code. And so you get better success, better performance. And many of the customers that we're finding, so if I look outside of financial services and more broadly at AI, companies like Walmart, Novo Nordisk, Adobe, Uber, we have many banks that have dozens of projects and dozens of POCs actively in the works using AI, using graphs as a basis and a foundation for knowledge in their AI system. You can really think of this as being a left brain in a world where AI behaves like a right brain. Many financial services activities are very high stakes and there's no room for error and there's no room for lack of explainability. Good luck telling in an auditor that, the AI made this mistake and I don't know why. That results in a fine. And so where financial services companies are seeing a huge amount of value and we're seeing huge acceleration in the space is in providing that left brain to the LLM right brain so that you have 2 hemispheres available to agents and have a system of knowledge that can address hallucinations, in some cases give you 100% accurate answers with full explainability, and importantly with respect for access control. So what data is appropriate for use at what time based on privacy, based on firewalls between, say, corporate banking and investment banking, and so on. So that's really the big motivation behind being here and why there's for AI to succeed, you really need a knowledge graph and a graph intelligence platform.
Yeah. And I guess, as you say, it's a heavily regulated market. So does that present you with any challenges getting access to data and defining it? Or because you're dealing with mostly proprietary data, I guess that doesn't affect you too much?
It's actually been a strength for us because we provide an option of banks running our software in our database themselves, keeping all the data in-house, running it in their data centers even if they'd like. And that's something we've been doing for over a decade. So it's a very natural fit with a data sovereignty play where there are many concerns about where data is stored, what country it's in, what company it's hosted with. At the same time, for use cases that are suitable for and where there's a preference for running in the cloud, we run a fully managed service where that's SOC 2 compliant and ISO 27001 and PCI DSS, HIPAA, et cetera, where customers can even bring their own encryption keys. So even though the data is hosted in, say, by us in AWS, GCP, Azure, they hold the key and no one can read the data other than them. So there's a convenience there, but really it's a menu of options that allow banks to deploy AI in a way where they control their data and we can access it other than themselves.
Yeah, as you say, in a regulated world, that's kind of really, really important.
100%.
I guess thinking lastly about sort of the future, and the future is a very difficult thing to sort of be predicting at this moment in time. We've obviously loosely touched on the world of AI. What's your thoughts for, how that's going to affect things in, say, 6 months or 12 months' time?
I see this trend really um, expanding and becoming a wave in the same way that when we had our ChatGPT moment, everybody started to use that one tool. It's part of the natural pendulum swing. There's a new tool that looks like it's infinitely capable. Let's try to solve everything with that. And then quickly we realized, no, we need other technologies. Vectors and vector databases came up as one common tool. And you still have 95% of projects failing according to MIT. And what I'm seeing actually overcome that higher bar that you have, particularly in financial services, hallucinations, determinism, these are terms judgment to refer to what data is appropriate to use for what purpose, what time, what person, and then having context is is really the next step. And then for viewers who are looking at the LinkedIn sphere and Twitter sphere, X sphere, in their feeds over the last month, there have been dozens of blogs published about context graphs uh, on the back of um, a blog post by VC calling context graphs the next $1 trillion opportunity. So clearly there's a foundation capital. So there's clearly a huge amount of momentum here. And so, as always, it's buzz followed by deployment. But in this case, there have actually been many deployments. We have 84 of the Fortune 100, nearly all the biggest Western banks, number of banks in Asia and Singapore. So really looking forward to working together with banks in region in the Middle East as the AI economy here just continues to grow.
Yeah, it's obviously we're going to be talking about it for quite a period of time, and this region here is really looking to capitalize on it at the moment. So, thank you very much for speaking to me at the FinTech Times.
It's been a pleasure.